And we are back with the 5 Democratic candidates for governor here in Virginia. One of the central divides in this race is the experience that some of you are running on versus the new directions that others are calling for, or something in between. So I want to ask each of you a version of the same question of simply about why you and not your other opponent should be the next governor. Mr. McAuliffe, I will start with you. In the most recent debate before this one, Jennifer Carroll Foy said you represented the politics of the past. So why are you the best person to be your party's nominee in the future?
Listen, I'm here today because people know that I will go big and bold. People know that we now have COVID and the effects of that are going to be around for a long time. But I'm here because the leadership of the Black Caucus of Virginia came to me and said, Terry, no one leaned in more for the black and brown community that you did. More rights restoration than any governor in the history of the United States of America. More pardons than any governor before me here in Virginia. You know, State Senator President Pro Tem Louise Lucas, the most powerful African-American woman in the state, said, we need you to come back. She's now chairing my campaign. But that's why, if you look today, Chuck, that I have 3 times as many support from the Black Caucus of Virginia as everybody else on this stage combined. Why? I went big and bold under difficult situations before. We need experience now to lead us out of this very tough crisis. I did it before, I'll do it again, and I have big, bold plans, 130 pages, 14 proposals on my website to take Virginia to the next level. We've tinkered around long enough.
All right.
It is time to lead the country.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll Foy, you have never run for statewide office before, and you've served just a single full term in the House of Delegates. So why should the party take a chance on you to defeat the Republican nominee, Glenn Youngkin?
So the Republican Governors Association is attacking me because they are worried, and they should be. They know that I am the most electable in this race because I will out-inspire and outwork the Republicans in November. I flipped a Republican district while pregnant with twins and being outspent and out-endorsed, but I will never be outworked. So many people have told me all my life that it's not my time and not my turn. Millions of women out there know exactly what that feels like, having our experience undermined and our credentials questioned. But I'm not here to ask the patriarchy for permission. I'm here to get things done for the people of Virginia. And I've been one of the most effective legislators in Virginia's history, passing the Equal Rights Amendment, Medicaid expansion, and so much more. So we have an opportunity to build back Virginia in a way that leaves no one behind. And that's what this campaign is about. That's why we're mobilizing. We have the energy. We have the message that's resonating with the people. And I ask for their support for governor on June 8th.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan. A new TV ad of yours argues that Mr. McAuliffe represents the past, but you chaired his transition to be governor. So how do you square your past support of him versus your opposition now?
Governor McAuliffe was the right governor for that time, but Virginia is different. And the good news is we don't have to choose between a new perspective and experience because I bring both. I bring the experience of someone whose parents lived through the tyranny of Jim Crow during the Depression. And I came to the General Assembly as a 32-year-old Black woman from the most Democratic district in the state, operating in a body that was mostly white Republican men over 50. And yet I've been able to pass over 300 bills. And since being in the majority, I'm the only person on this stage who has passed bills to address the clean energy and address climate change, to expand access to reproductive health, to expand worker protections to domestic workers, and to create the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, one of the strongest voting rights act in the country. And I have the support of the people on the ground who have been doing the work to address inequity and have done more to address inequity than any other candidate on this stage. And bringing perspectives that were not represented in the General Assembly, I will do the same as governor. And that is why the grassroots support of New Virginia Majority and Care in Action is so important, because they know I've been doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Mr. Fairfax, you are running on your experience as lieutenant governor. But if voters are looking for experience, executive experience, why choose you over somebody who's already been governor?
Well, Chuck, our current governor, Governor Northam, served as lieutenant governor and then was elected to governor. The same for now Senator Tim Kaine. And of course, Governor Doug Wilder first served as lieutenant governor and 4 years later was elected governor. I believe the experience that we've had over the last 4 years being part of the most progressive administration in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, is something that has really resonated with millions of voters around the Commonwealth. I have been proud of the work that I've done to break the ties to expand Medicaid. So now 550,000 more Virginians have health insurance as a result. Breaking the ties to make Virginia the first state in the South to legalize marijuana. Also helping to lead the fight around gun violence prevention, focusing on so many of the issues that go to the heart of whether or not people are safe, secure, and have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. And so we put forward an incredible vision that is focused on investments in education, investments in the future, and you pair that with the experience that we've had, the success that we've had over the last 4 years, and that's a vision that I think Virginia supports.
Thank you, Mr. Fairfax. And Mr. Carter, Democrats have been trying to defend themselves from Republicans calling them socialists for years now. But you're a proud socialist, Democrat. Why wouldn't that be a liability for the party's next gubernatorial nominee?
Because they're going to call you that anyway, Chuck. They call Joe Biden a socialist, and he's about as far right as you can get in the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is not beholden to the truth. And so you just got to lean in. You got to explain the benefits of your policies to the voters. And the question is, who is going to excite voters the most in November? Are people who have been fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline and Atlantic Coast Pipeline for the last 6 or 7 years going to be excited to vote for the guy who approved those pipelines? Of course they're not. Are people who are struggling to pay the rent because the Amazon deal jacked up the price of their housing going to be excited to vote for any of the 4 candidates that supported it? Of course they're not. Are people who care about getting money out of politics going to be excited to vote for a corporate funded candidate? Of course they're not. I'm the only candidate in this Democratic primary who's never taken a single dime from fossil fuel corporations, who's never taken a single dime from big banks, who's never taken a single dime from police organizations. I've never taken any money from any for-profit corporation or industry interest group. I never have, and I never will.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Julie Carey has the next question for you guys.
In a story that drew national attention last month, police in Windsor, Virginia, pepper sprayed Army Lieutenant Caron Nazario during a traffic stop. The local police department fired the officer who pepper sprayed Nazario, who is Black and Latino, but it refused to apologize to him. As governor, what would you do to make sure police departments across the Commonwealth are treating all Virginians equally? And what more needs to be done to hold law enforcement accountable? Mr. Fairfax, if you'll please answer first.
This is a critical issue, and we have made progress in Virginia in our most recent sessions around criminal justice reform and policing reform, banning no-knock warrants, banning chokeholds, making it easier to decertify officers that engage in police misconduct. But as that Windsor incident highlights, and so many incidents around Virginia and around our nation, there is still so much more work to be done. We need to have a diversified police force. We need to have retraining and bias training so that so much of what we've seen around racial bias, where drivers and others who encounter police are treated very differently based on the color of their skin and what neighborhood they may be in, has to stop. And so we need to make those investments, but also ensure that there's accountability. We need universal body cameras throughout Virginia. We also have to make sure that when an officer is brought up on misconduct charges, that it's transparent. And then we have civilian review boards with subpoena power, so there's accountability in the community.
Mr. McAuliffe, you're next.
Yeah, Julie, you saw that video. You were just plain horrified. I have a son who's a captain in the United States Marine Corps, and he was stationed down in the Hampton Roads region by Windsor. I can promise you what Lieutenant Nazario went through, my son, who is white, would never be stopped if he was wearing the flag and cloth of our country. That would not have happened to him. And we can't tolerate it. We need zero tolerance for this. So as governor, I will make sure that we need full accountability. We need full transparency with our law enforcement. We need body cameras. Everybody should have body cameras, and they also should be turned on. So if they're on duty, those cameras have to be turned on. And that's what we need to do going forward. It is just absolutely critical to build an equitable. An equitable criminal justice system is something I fought for as governor. As I mentioned before, I had more pardons than any governor before me. I restored more felon rights than any governor in U.S. history. The Republicans sued me for contempt of court. I will always lean in to make sure we have a fair, equitable criminal justice system, It is key to the success of our Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
The United States incarcerates more of its people than any other country in history. In history. And the overwhelming majority of those people are locked up by state courts, not federal. But every one of those incarcerations begins with an encounter with a police officer. And so we have to address the problem where it begins, in police funding. Now, when Terry McAuliffe was governor, he increased police funding twice as fast as the Republican governor before him. But I have actually fought to decrease police funding because I think we're asking police to do too much. I don't think it makes sense to have an armed policeman doing mental health checks or welfare checks or traffic enforcement. I think that we need to go line by line on all of the things that we're asking police to do and ask ourselves, does it make sense to have an armed policeman do this job? Or would we all be safer, including the police officers, if we had an unarmed non-police agency handling this task? I think we need to start from scratch, and we need to reimagine what public safety looks like that doesn't begin with a police officer pointing a gun at someone.
Thank you, Ms. Carol Foy.
So as the first public defender ever elected to the Virginia General Assembly, I've been fighting this issue from the courthouse to the state house. Every day I walk into that courtroom and I am protecting my clients, people who are majority Black, brown, poor Virginians. And I can tell you that oftentimes the cameras aren't on when I have a client come to me who's been beaten and bruised while in police custody. But it is my job to hold everyone's feet to the fire and ensure I protect people's constitutional rights. And so I say, don't listen to the rhetoric, check the record. And I have a record of carrying a bill as a legislator to prohibit the use of chokeholds by law enforcement officers so we don't have an Eric Garner situation here in Virginia. Helping to pass a bill to have a ban on no-knock warrants so we don't have a Breonna Taylor situation here in Virginia. But if we do, helping to pass bills as a legislator to have civilian review boards, but as governor, I'll go bigger and bolder, and I will have mandated civilian review boards with subpoena power throughout Virginia and in qualified immunity.
And Ms. McClellan.
This is not a new issue, and I have had to answer questions from my son that I hoped I'd never have to answer about whether he could be the victim of gun violence or police violence in particular, as he's seen children not much older than him killed by police officers. The record will show that I have been working on this issue in criminal justice reform comprehensively before the cameras were on, before it was hot topic for the press. And we need to build on that progress. I helped to write the bills that passed during the special session addressing comprehensive police reform, including the Marcus Alert, but we need to make it stronger. We need to make sure that when someone is in a mental health crisis and a mental health professional is on the scene, that police officers that may be on the scene are not in marked cars or in uniform, because that in and of itself can be triggering. We have to end qualified immunity, because when a police officer violates someone's civil rights and it ends in death or injury, they need to be held accountable. We need to have more than just civilian review boards with subpoena power. We need to have independent investigative units at the Attorney General's office and for our state law enforcement. Before
Jumi asks the next question, I want to give the candidates a reminder. We're going to go down to 30-second answers now in order to get a couple more questions in. Jumi Olabanji with the next question.
Thank you so much. We know that President Joe Biden has proposed raising taxes on the wealthy, not only for millionaires, but for Virginians who make more than $400,000. Do you support higher taxes for this group of Virginians, those with incomes less than $1 million, but more than $400,000 a year? We will begin with Mr. Carter.
Absolutely. Our income tax here in Virginia has its highest bracket starting at just $17,000, which means if you work 40 hours a week at minimum wage, you are paying in the highest tax bracket. I think that's absurd. There's no other country on earth that can call itself progressive that has a tax system that leans so heavily on the poor as ours does, and that has got to change.
Ms. Carol Foy, you're next.
So, yes, I do. And I can say that while wages have not significantly grown, the wealth gap has. We need to reward work and not just wealth. And as governor, I will find wasteful spending, ineffective tax breaks, and close corporate loopholes. And I have a plan on my website at jennifercarolfoy.com, the only gubernatorial candidate to raise $8 billion in new revenue in the next 10 years. Please go to jennifercarolfoy.com.
Ms. McClellan, you're next.
I support comprehensive tax reform that makes Virginia's tax code more fair, more progressive, and less regressive, which is why, as a member of the Senate Finance Committee, I was proud to support and get in our state budget that comprehensive review that's happening right now, and will make recommendations before the next governor is elected, in which I will make sure that we implement tax reform that shifts the tax burden so that it's not disproportionately falling on people who can't afford to pay. It is not disproportionately falling on our local governments to fill gaps that the state is not.
Mr. Fairfax, your answer.
Yes, I support President Biden's initiative to reform our tax system to ensure that not only is it more equitable, but that we're able to make the investments that we need to make to deal with this COVID-19 pandemic, but also the inequalities that we have seen in our education system, our healthcare system, and housing, to ensure there's more affordable housing and housing security. And so these are tied to investment that are critical. And as we've seen with the support that's come in from the federal government over the course of the last year, it is essential to have the resources to be able to together deal with these issues so that everyone can be supported.
And Mr. McAuliffe, we'll go to you.
Sure. The president's raising money to fund infrastructure, which is sorely needed. We need it here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think the work, I remind everybody, when I became governor of the Port of Virginia, was in financial disarray. It's now one of the most profitable ports in the East Coast. Dulles Airport was in trouble. I worked with United to save 45,000 jobs up at Dulles International Airport. So we want a fair tax code, but let's be honest, Glenn Youngkin is a private equity billionaire who supported the Trump tax cuts, cuts where 80% went to the top 1%. That is the challenge that Virginia is going to face in the general election.
Thank you, Mr. McAuliffe. Final question here. Republicans pick their nominee for governor through a convention. And this means that there could be thousands of Republican voters voting in this contest. Since Virginia is an open primary state, and since this is the only primary they can participate in. So, what is your message to these Virginia Republicans who might be considering casting a ballot in the Democratic primary on June 8th? Ms. McClellan, 30 seconds.
Well, I'm hoping that you're voting in the primary because you want a governor that is going to solve our problems. And we are at a critical crossroads as a Commonwealth where we need to rebuild our economy, our healthcare, our economic safety nets, our education system in a way that leaves no Virginian and no Virginia community behind. And I have proven, working 14 years in the minority party, that I can stand up for progressive values and addressing inequity while working across the aisle and finding common ground, because we have more in common than divides us. And it is time for a governor candidate who focuses on what we can do together and not just on dividing us.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Mr. Fairfax.
I was proud, Chuck, when I was elected to lieutenant governor in 2017 to have received the most votes in the history of Virginia, 1.36 million votes for lieutenant governor. And that included many people who also may identify as Republican or independents. But that's because we had a message like we have now that focused on lifting up all 8.5 million Virginians. And so as we provided health care to 150,000 more Virginians, those aren't all Democrats. As we are doing transformational investments in education, those apply across the board to all of our children. And so it's a universal message about lifting everyone up, and we want everyone's support.
Thank you, Mr. Fairfax. Mr. McAuliffe, your case to Republican voters.
We're going to face a tough economy. COVID has been devastating to so many Virginia families. As governor before, through the Great Recession, sequestration, I inherited the largest debt, left a gigantic surplus, record 200,000 new jobs, billion-dollar record investment in education. I'll work on the economy. I worked in a bipartisan way with Republicans. As governor, I got over 70% of my governor's bills passed with an extreme right-wing legislature. I kept our 16 women's health clinics open. I stopped all the antisocial legislation that came to my desk. I built an open and welcoming state with a dynamite economy, and I'm going to do it again.
Thank you. Mr. Carter, your appeal to potential Republican voters.
Well, to any potential Republican voters out there, I'd say you don't have to agree with me to know that I'm telling it to you true. I'm the only candidate in this Democratic primary who's never taken any money from for-profit corporations or industry interest groups. So I'm working for the people of Virginia and only for the people of Virginia. And you know that I don't just toe the party line. I criticize my own party just as much as I criticize the Republicans. I'm proud to have the least partisan voting record in the House of Delegates through my time there, not because I vote with the other party, but because I vote against both parties when I feel they're both in the wrong. So I am honest with you, and I am only working for you.
And Ms. Carol Foy, your message to potential Republican primary voters.
As one of the first women to ever graduate from Virginia Military Institute, it taught me to not care if people have a D.I. or R beside their name. My job is to get the job done. And that's what I've done, being one of the most effective legislators in Virginia's history. And so I can tell you that voters are tired of voting for wealthy, out-of-touch politicians, failing to stand with victims of police violence, or fighting for women's equality. And that's why we need a new leader with a clear vision and bold ideas and a record of getting things done for the people of Virginia. Please join me and vote Jennifer Carol Foy on June 8th.
Well, you guys all made it under the time cues. I appreciate that. This concludes this candidates forum. Thank you to the Democratic Party of Virginia, NBC4 and Telemundo 44 for making all of this forum possible. And thanks to the candidates for their participation. By the way, don't forget to vote. The primary is on June 8th. Thanks for tuning in. And for all our panelists, this is Chuck Todd in Washington.